I'm going to start off this video with a review of most of the things I went over in the last video. So, first, middle lone tiles are just in general better than edge lone tiles. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are the best, and then 2 and 8, and then 1 and 9. Sometimes, based on the other tiles you have in your hand, lone tiles can be less useful or also more useful than normal. And I didn't really talk about more useful in the last video, but I'll talk about it some here. And then, in general, having groups of two that just needed one tile to make a set of three is better than just having a lone tile. And then some groups of two are better than other groups of two. And you also want to be careful about when you have to break up completed sets to form a group of two. So for example, in this hand, you might look at it and say, this 9 and a 7 is a group of two. But if you took out the 7 to go with the 9, then you'd only have 5, 6, and you'd be breaking up your completed set already. So it's better to look at it as a completed set of 5, 6, 7, and then a lone 9, and this lone 9 is very good. And even in this case, this 6 could make multiple two-sided weights, so you could have a 5, 6, 6, 7. But if you were to do that, you'd be breaking up your already completed set of 3, so it's not always the best thing to do. And it's better to look at it as a completed set of 3 and a lone 6. Just a lone 6 like this is a very good lone 6, better than normal. So that's an example of a tile that's more useful because of the other tiles you have in your hand. I also didn't really talk about this in the last video, but you want to focus more on making hands rather than making yaku. So instead of, you do want to learn the yaku, and you want to know if you can have them open and close and how much they're worth. You want to learn all that, but you should really focus more on just trying to make your hand. And then if it so happens that there's a yaku you can get as well, like Sanshoku or Honitsu or something, then you can go for that. But first, you just want to learn what's the best way, or what's the best way to make your hand to discard so that you have the best chance of just making any hand, maybe even a hand with no yaku other than a closed hand. And lastly, I want to mention that you should think about lost tiles. So what do you lose out on when you discard a tile? And then I do want to remind you that there are always plenty of exceptions, so you don't want to take these rules and just say, these are the rules you should always follow. That's definitely not true. There's plenty of exceptions, but these are the things you want to make sure you know first. And then as you get a lot better, then you should look at the exceptions. So if you have all of these ideas down well, then you should be able to determine what the best discard is in all of these examples. And you can pause to look at them if you want. So here's the first one. You just drew a 9 pin. Now what do you discard? Well, from the rules above, groups of 2 are better than just lone tiles. This 8 is a lone tile. Everything else is either a completed set or a group of 2. So you want to discard the 8. The 8 of characters. Now let's say you discard that 8 and then you draw an 8 pin. What should you discard now? Well, you have 3 different groups of 2, but with the idea that some are better than others, you know that the 7-8 is best because it's two-sided, and the other ones are just single weights. So you would want to discard one of your single weights. And then, going even deeper, you want to discard either the 2 of characters or the 5 of bamboo to give yourself the best chance of drawing another two-sided weight. But that's going more complex. The simple idea is you just want to discard one of your single weights and you want to keep the two-sided weight. Now here's the next hand. So this is your hand and you draw a 9 pin. What do you discard now? Now, if you look at it, it looks like the 9 goes with the 7, so you might think about keeping it. But this goes back to that idea of you're breaking up a set of 3 to use this 9 with the 7. So it's better to look at it as a set of 3 and a lone 9. And a lone 7 is better than a lone 9, so you want to discard the 9. Also, your other tiles all go together in groups of 2 or more. So you would discard either the 9 pin or the 7 of characters usually, and a 7 is better than a 9, so you discard the 9 usually. Now let's say you have almost the same hand, but instead of a 7 of characters, it's a 9 of characters. Now what do you discard? Well, this 9 is actually better than a normal lone 9 because of the other tiles you have in your hand. So in this case, you would discard the 9 of characters. Because if you drew like an 8 pin, then you would have a 2-sided weight left over. Whereas if you drew an 8 of characters to go with the 9 of characters, it would just be an edge weight. And that's why this 9 with the 5, 6, 7 is better than just the lone 9. And here's one more very similar example. Now instead of 9s, there's 6s this time. What do you discard here? Well, again, in this shape, this lone 6 is much better than just a normal 6. So you want to discard the lone 6 of characters and keep the 6 pin that goes with the 5, 6, 7. Alright, so now in this hand, what would you discard? You just drew this 9 of bamboo. Is it helping you? The answer is yes, it is helping you because it goes with the 7, so you have a 7, 9, and a single weight to complete a set. So this 9 is part of a group of 2, and you're not breaking up a set of 3 because you have the 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 9. Similarly, the 2 is helping you as well because you have 2, 4, and then 5, 6, 7. So you don't have to break up a set of 3 to use the 2 in a group of 2. So this 2 and 9 both give you a weight to complete another set. So you want to discard this 3, which is just a lone tile. Now here's a very similar hand. What do you discard here? You again have a 9, 7, but this time it's a little bit different. You have 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 9. This 9 is much less useful than normal, so you would just want to discard the 9. It's not helping you at all, because if you drew the 8, it would go with the 6, 7. And so let's say you do discard the 9, and then you draw a 5 pin. Now what do you discard? You would generally just discard either the 8 pin or the 3 pin, but you would be planning on discarding both of those because both of those aren't really helping you anymore. But usually you would discard the 8 pin first because it's closer to the edge and you could draw like a 2 pin and have another 2-sided weight. Now let's move on to the next hand. In this hand, you just drew a 1 of bamboo, so what do you want to discard here? Again, the idea is pretty simple. This 1 goes with the 3 to make a group of 2 that can improve to a set of 3 with 1 tile. So you want to keep this over lone tiles like the lone 3 pin. So you would just discard this 3 pin. And this hand looks pretty similar. So what do you discard here? This is probably the most complicated hand in these examples. But here, you should probably discard the 8 of characters. And the simple idea is that this 8, 9 weight overlaps with the 5, 6 weight. So if you discard the 8 of characters, you're losing out on drawing the 7 of characters to go with the 8, 9. But you're not actually losing out on it because you have a 5, 6 and you can still use the 7. So for that reason, the 8 isn't very useful. And every other tile in your hand has some use. That's it for the review of the basics, and now I'm going to move on to the concepts of this video. Now, I'm going to start out with just some general advice. Before you make your first discard, you usually want to check the dealer, the dora, and the score. And I'll talk about the dealer and the score more later, but you want to know what the dora is so you don't just discard it first for no reason. So let's say your hand is like this and the dora is the west wind. And maybe it's the south round, so south is Yakuhai, and you just instinctively discard the west wind as your first discard. Now, in general, that's not going to be a good thing to do because the west wind is a dora, so you want to hold on to it because it's an easy way to get a lot of points, and often it's really hard to get a lot of points without dora. So, you wouldn't want to just discard the west wind first usually. There are always some exceptions, but you should know the west wind is the dora before you discard it. Now let's look at another hand and say 8 of characters is the dora. So, what do you discard here? Well, the 2 of bamboo, the 8 bamboo, and the 8 of characters are all pretty similar in value, so you could discard any of them. But since the 8 of characters is dora, you wouldn't want to discard that one because you have it and it's the dora, so you want to hold on to it and try to use it if you can. So I would consider it a pretty big mistake if you were to just discard it on the first turn. Now, here's another example. Let's say the dora is the 9 of bamboo. And you draw this 9 pin, which completes a 2-sided weight. Now you have to discard one of your other weights. Which one do you discard? Well, probably not the 2-sided one. And the 1 and the 3 and the 7 and the 9 with no other information would be equal to each other. But since the 9 is the dora, you would discard the 1 and the 3. And you would discard the 1 first because you might draw like a 4 bamboo and then you might want to hold the 2-sided weight. But because the 9 of bamboo is the dora, you would hold on to that 9 of bamboo. And also, if the 7 or the 8 of bamboo was the dora, you would hold on to the 7, 9 as well. And if the 1, 2, or 3 were the dora, you would discard the 7, 9. And here's another example. Let's say the dora is the 8 pin, and this is your hand. You might say, well, you have 3 lone tiles, the lone 4, lone 7, and the other lone 7 bamboo. So they're all pretty equal to each other, but the dora is the 8 pin, so you want to keep the 7 pin for sure, so that if you drew the dora or a tile around the 7 pin, you might be able to use the dora. So for that reason, you would choose either the 4 pin or the 7 bamboo, but not the 7 pin in most cases. Now that doesn't mean that you should never discard the dora early, but let's say your hand is like this and the dora is the 2 pin. This is one case where I'd say it's perfectly fine to discard the dora right here, because it's going to be very hard to use both the 2 pin and the 5 pin together. You're usually only going to be able to use one, so just discard the 2 pin and keep your 2-sided weight. And here's another example. Let's say west wind is the dora, and this is your hand. So in this hand, every other tile is being useful to your hand, so it's perfectly fine. Your hand is also really good as it is, so it's probably best to discard the west wind dora here. And one thing you do want to make sure you know is that the 7 of characters in this 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 7 shape is a useful tile, because the 7 allows you to use the 6 of characters, whereas if you discard the 7, the 6 of characters no longer completes a second set. So if you keep the 7 and draw 6, you'd have 5, 6, 7, and 2, 3, 4. If you discard the 7 and draw 6, you'd have 4, 5, 6, and 2, 3, 3, but that's not a set of 3. It's just a weight. So that's why the 7 is useful. And in this specific example, it's even better because if you were to draw the 6, then you get Tan Yao for sure. So you want to make sure you keep the 7. Okay, the next topic is just really basic defense. And I feel like there are a lot of pretty good guides that you can find online for defense, but um, I'm just going to go over like really basic topics in this section. And first, the idea behind defense is that if you know someone's going to win, like if someone declares reach or you know they're in tenpai somehow, then you don't want to play into their hand because they're losing a lot more points. So you just want to play defensive and discard tiles that you don't think are going to play into the person's hand. So the easiest tiles are Genbutsu, which are tiles that are guaranteed to be safe because of the rules of the game. So any tile the player has discarded already, and also all the tiles that have been discarded after reach, are Genbutsu, and they're guaranteed to be safe against that player. And then you're not always going to have Genbutsu, so the next thing to think about is Suji. And there's 3 sets of Suji, the 147, the 258, and the 369. And the way Suji works is just if someone discards one of the middle tiles, a 4 or a 5 or a 6, the Suji on the outside are more likely to be safe. So if someone discards a 4 pin, the 1 pin and the 7 pin are much more likely to be safe than normal. Same with the 5 and the 2 and the 8 and the 6 and the 3 and the 9. And also, if a player discards a 1 and a 7, then the 4 is more likely to be safe. So if someone discards the 2 on the edge, then the 1 in the middle is more likely to be safe. And the reason for that is Suji are the tiles that complete your 2-sided weights. So if someone has like a 2-3 pin, it's going to be waiting on a 1 or a 4. So that's why 1 and 4 are together as a Suji. And if someone has a 5-6, it's going to be waiting on a 4 or a 7. So you have your 4-7 Suji. And by discarding the 4, you guarantee the person can't have a 5-6 and win off the 7 because they discard the 4. So that's why the 7 is more likely to be safe. Same with the 1, if someone discards a 4, they can't have a 2-3 2-sided weight, and 2-sided weights are the best. So because they can't have a 2-3, it's more likely the 1 is going to be safe. And the same thing works with all the other Suji. And the way the outside ones work is if someone discards a 1 and a 7, it means they can't have either a 2-3 or a 5-6 weight. So because they can't have either of those, the 4 is more likely to be safe. Now, even with Suji, there's some Suji that are better than others, just the ones on the edge. And that is because they complete fewer weights. So if someone discards, say, a 6 pin, and this 9 pin is now Suji, then it's much safer than, say, like an 8 Suji, because the only way the player can win with a 9 is if they have a 9 waiting to pair, or if they have 2 9s waiting to make a triplet. That's the only way they can win. And say you can see the other 3 9s on the table and you have one, you know your 9 is safe because they don't have a pair, or they don't have a single 9 or a pair of 9s. So they can't win off the 9, and you know it's safe, guaranteed. Now that's not true for like an 8 or a 7, because a player can win off of an 8 with a 7-9, even when it's Suji. So the player doesn't have 6-7, but they could have 7-9 and win off an 8, even if you can see all of the 8s. And also with like a 7, a player can have a 6-8 or an 8-9. So even though the 7 is Suji, you can still play into a hand that has a 6-8 or an 8-9. Now, after Genbutsu and Suji, if you don't have any of those, usually you just want to discard non-Yakuhai honor tiles, and then Yakuhai honor tiles, and then terminals and like tiles closer to the edge. But that would generally be after you discard your Suji and you run out of Suji and you run out of Genbutsu. That's the order of tiles you would usually want to discard. Again, this is just the basics, though, and there's a lot more to be said about that. Now, one really big point I want to make is that if you're going to play aggressively after someone declares reach, you want to make sure you're discarding your safest useless tiles first. So, let's say your hand is like this, and you're just saying, I don't really care about defense. I know the person declared reach, but I want to go after my hand anyway. Now, that's fine, but you don't want to discard, say, the 7 bamboo first because you have a west wind that's not being useful, and it's pretty likely to be safe, or it might be guaranteed based on the tiles that have been discarded already. And you also have this 1 that's more likely to be safe. So you can go after your hand, but you want to make sure you're just discarding your safest useless tiles first, because something that might happen is maybe someone else was going to discard the 7 bamboo right after you, and they were going to play into the hand. So even though you weren't going to fold and you would probably eventually discard the 7 bamboo, by discarding it later, you let someone else play in first, or you let the person draw it first and you don't lose as much points. Or sometimes you'll just like not draw the tiles you need, but you'll draw tiles that are safe to discard, and it might just get to the end of the round with no one playing in, and you just kept drawing safe tiles, so you didn't play in either, even though like the 7 of bamboo was their winning tile, and you would have discarded it eventually. Now, as for when you should think about playing defensive, you usually want to think about defending when someone declares reach, but you might not if you're in if you're in Tenpai, you probably wouldn't, and if you declared reach already, you can't. If you're pretty close to Tenpai and your hand's big, worth a lot of points, maybe you aren't going to defend. Or if you have to win because of the situation with the score, then you wouldn't defend. Now against like big open hands, you might defend, like if someone calls pon on a dragon that's also the dora, so they have an open mangan already pretty much. If you think they're in Tenpai, you might just want to defend against them and try to not play into their hand. And also, against the dealer gets more points, and you lose more points if you play into a dealer's hand. So you want to consider defending even more if it's the dealer who's dangerous. And in higher level rooms, you also want to think about defending against Dama-ten hands, or hands where people don't declare reach as the round goes on. And I'm going to finish off with an example of a hand. So if your hand is like this, it looks pretty good, and it is pretty good, unless if it's gotten pretty late into the round, this hand isn't that good anymore, because you need to draw a lot of tiles to get into Tenpai, or to complete the hand. If it's really early, this hand is much better though. But with a hand like this, if someone declares reach, even though your hand looks pretty good, it's not actually that close to Tenpai, and you would have to discard a lot of dangerous tiles to get there. So if, say, the 9 of bamboo was safe and the 1 pin wasn't guaranteed to be safe, you might just want to discard the 9 of bamboo, because even if you do that, you could possibly redraw your hand. And if the 1 might be dangerous, you might just not want to discard it, even though your hand looks pretty good. Okay, the next topic is lost tiles and furiten. So, when you discard a tile, you should try to be aware of what tiles you're losing out on when you make that discard. And I'll go through examples here, but in this hand, let's say you choose to discard the 5 pin, which isn't what I would choose, but you could do that if you wanted. So let's say you discard the 5 pin. what tiles are you losing out on? You're losing out on the 3 pin, 4 pin, 5 pin, 6 pin, and 7 pin, which would have otherwise helped you out if you had kept the 5 pin. So, those are the tiles you should remember. You're kind of losing out on those tiles. Now, let's say you draw like a 3 of bamboo and your hand progresses, and now you say, oh, wait, maybe I can get Itsu in the bamboo tiles, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you discard the 3, 1. And then while you're discarding the 3, 1, you draw a 3 pin and then a 4 pin. And then now you say, oh, wait, well, now I have a like two-sided, a double middleweight here and a two-sided weight here, so maybe I can just discard the 9 and not go for Itsu. And I might get Pinfu. But you want to remember you lost out on these tiles. And so now if you keep them, you're going to be in furiten because you discarded the 5. So after discarding the 5, you should remember when you draw the 3, you kind of lost out on it. So it should be in your mind. And then when you draw the 4, you should remember, alright, I discarded the 5 already, so this is furiten. And maybe I shouldn't keep the 3, 4. Now here's another example. You draw the 7, and now you have 2 double middleweights, a 1, 3, 5 and a 1, 3, 5, and you have to get rid of something. So let's say you pick the 1 pin, and you're losing out on the 2 pin because that no longer gets you into tenpai when it would have, when it would have if you had kept the 1 pin. So let's say you draw the 2 pin, and you look at it and say, well, now you have a 2-sided weight, but you lost out on this tile. So if you keep the 2-sided weight, you're now in furiten. So it's up to you, but a lot of the times you would just discard the 2 pin and think of it as an unfortunate draw or an unfortunate choice of discarding the 1 pin. Okay, here's another example. Let's say your hand is like this and it's pretty good, and you just discard this 9 of characters, which makes sense. But discarding the 9 of characters makes you lose out on the 7 and the 8 of characters that would go with it. That doesn't mean you can never use those tiles, but they're a little bit like they would have been more useful, and holding on to them might get you into furiten when you lose out on them. So let's say you do draw 7 of characters. Normally a lone 7 is better than a lone 8, but in this case you kind of lost out on this tile, so you might just want to discard it. Like, it would be pretty normal to just discard it over the 8. And then let's say you discard it and draw a 5. Well, you might have to discard that one too because you discarded the 7, so the 5 isn't so good anymore. Because if you draw the 6, it's now a furiten weight. So you could keep it if you want, but you might just discard the 5 as well. And for reasons like this, I think something interesting to think about is discarding the 3 pin in this exact hand. And I'm not sure if this is a great choice, but it's something interesting to think about if you're trying to play for like 7 dan and higher. So it's not something I would say you should think about it if you just want to like learn the basics or just try to even like get up to 5th or 6th dan. You probably don't need to think about this, but if you want to get really technical, maybe there's some point to discarding the 3 pin. Now, here's another hand, and this 5 pin is really useful, so it would be pretty normal to just discard the 9 of bamboo here, which is useful, but not as useful as the 5 pin, and discarding the 9 of bamboo makes it so that you can get Tanyao. But discarding the 9 makes you lose out on the 8 of bamboo, so if you were to draw the 8 of bamboo, now you would have to remember that if you keep the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's now a furiten weight. So you want to remember that. You could keep it if you want, but you want to know it is furiten. The next topic is flexible hands. So the idea here is that you want to keep your hand flexible and keep as many options open as you can. You don't really want to close off your hand to one very difficult option and make that the only thing you go for. You want to try to see everything that you could do with your hand. So let's say your hand is like this. You have 3 pairs and a set of 3. So it kind of looks like you could get like toy. So if someone discards a 1 of bamboo, would you call it? I would say that's a pretty bad call to make. You could do it, but I don't think it's a very good choice. And the reason is if you call the 1s, you can pretty much only win your hand with toy. And you're not like close to tenpai. Even if you make another call, you wouldn't be in tenpai. So, and it's really difficult because let's say you call the 1s, now you need exactly a 3 bamboo, and there's only 2 of those left, and a 6 of characters, and there's only 2 of those left, and you still need another pair somewhere. So that's not very many tiles to draw from. So for those reasons, I wouldn't call like the 1 of bamboo in this hand. But on the other hand, if someone discarded 3 of bamboo, would you call it? This one I'd say you definitely can if you want to. Call the 3 bamboo and discard west wind. And this hand would be flexible because you could still get Tan Yao. So if you draw tiles that would complete your hand in a different way, you might be able to get Tan Yao instead of toy. And I would say it's probably more likely that you'll end up with Tan Yao. So let's say you call the 3 bamboo, discard west wind, and now you draw a 4 pin. Now in this hand, because you have another pair, you're 1 away from tenpai on toy. I would think it's fine to go for toy. So you could discard the 4 of characters here, and then just try to get toy. But if your hand was like this, and you drew like the 5 of bamboo, the red 5 double dora, you could try to use it by discarding the 1/1 and going for a Tan Yao based on the other tiles you draw, or you could discard the 5 pin and then hope to draw another 5. But if you draw like a 6 of bamboo, you could then discard the 1/1 again and go for Tan Yao. So that's the benefit of keeping your hand flexible. So the call on the 3s gives you the option of either toy or Tan Yao, whereas calling the 1s limits you to just Tan Yao on a hand that's not that likely to get, or toy on a hand that's not that likely to get toy. And let's go back to the start where you call the 3 bamboo. Now let's say you draw a 5 of characters. Here you can just discard the 1 and the 1 because you're 1 away from tenpai on Tan Yao. So with this drop, you would probably just discard both 1 bamboos. Now here's another hand. You have 7 bamboo tiles in your hand and 4 honor tiles. You only have 2 tiles that aren't a bamboo or an honor tile. So it looks pretty clear that you could go for Honitsu this hand. So if someone discards a 7 of bamboo, would you call it? I would say that's a pretty bad call. I don't think that's a good call to make. You could do it if you want, and in some situations it would be fine, but I don't like that call. And the reason is, you could also get Itsu, so you could call the if it was a 4 bamboo, you could call it and then go for Itsu. And it doesn't have to be Honitsu, but it could be Honitsu. So calling the 7 is going to get rid of, well, you could call it 7 as 7, 8, 9 and hope to draw 4. But if you're going for, well, if you call it like that, it might not be as bad, but I don't know. I feel like this isn't a good hand to call the 7 of bamboo, but if it was the 4 bamboo or 2 bamboo, it would be fine to call it and go for Itsu. And one thing you do want to think about is it's hard to get Honitsu with this hand because you don't even have a pair of honor tiles, so it's really hard to get that pair of honor tiles that you'd really need because let's think about this. The number of tiles that go with this single 4 of characters is more than all of the tiles that go together with these 4 honor tiles combined. So it would probably be better to just discard an honor tile and keep like your 4 and your 5. So if you draw around it, you can go for like Pinfu and Itsu, those kinds of hands, rather than having to commit to Honitsu. So if you called the 7 with 7, 8, 9, you pretty much have to commit to Honitsu or hope you draw a 4 and don't get furiten for Itsu. Whereas if you call the 4, you have a good chance of, or you're 1 tile away from guaranteed Itsu, and you don't have to get Honitsu to win your hand. Now if your hand was like this, it's the same, except now you do have a pair of honor tiles. So, would you call a 7 this time? Maybe. I'd say it's not as bad as calling a 7 in the above hand because you do have that pair of honor tiles, so it's not so hard to get Honitsu. But I still don't like the call because you can still get Itsu in your hand. You're pretty close to that, so there's not really any need to call the 7 unless you like really want to win fast and you think Honitsu is the fastest way to win your hand. Because even in this hand, you can still draw around the 4 or the 5 and get closed Pinfu and declare Riichi if you want. And that would be as much as open Honitsu with no Yakuhai and not Itsu. Now, this is, once again, the same hand, except now you have 2 pairs of honor tiles. Now if someone discards the 7 of bamboo, this time if you were to call it, you're now 1 away from Tenpai, and it's pretty likely you're going to get west wind or north wind, so it's pretty likely you're going to make your hand. So I'd say it's perfectly fine to call the 7 of bamboo here if you're fine with just winning a pretty cheap hand. Or maybe one of your tiles is a dora as well, so your hand is worth more. And then the example hand from the last video, the last hand, was a good example of keeping a flexible hand. So here you have 5 pairs, so you want to try to keep Chi Toitsu, but you could also get I Peiko, Pinfu, and Tan Yao. Those are all the hands you could get. So by discarding the 3 of characters, you keep all of those options open. And depending on what you draw, you could make the choice of which ones you want to go for in the end. And let's say you draw the 2 of characters. Now, you could discard the 6 bamboo or the 3 bamboo. 6 bamboo would be for probably the most likely way to win your hand, but 3 bamboo keeps Chi Toitsu and also Tan Yao open. So let's say you discard the 3 bamboo. Now if you do that and someone discards like the 6 or the 7 of characters, would you call Pon on that for like Toi Toi Tan Yao? I'd say I don't think that's a good idea. Like if your hand is closed and you open it, I don't think that would be a good idea because if you're committed to Tan Yao or Toi Toi especially, then your hand becomes really difficult to win because here the tiles that could get you to Tenpai are a 5, 8 of characters or 2, 5, 6, 7, 8 of bamboo. That's a lot of tiles and a lot of pretty good tiles. But if you call Pon and only go for Toi Toi, then the only tiles that can get you into Tenpai are one of the last 2 6s, one of the last 2 6 bamboos, or one of the last 2 bamboos. And that's not very many tiles. So I definitely wouldn't make that call. Because you could win the hand closed and declare reach and get just as much or more points, depending on how you win the hand. But if you were to draw a 6 or a 7 of characters yourself, then you could keep it and go for bigger hands like Sanonko, Suonko if you're really lucky, Toi Toi. And also, if someone discarded the 2 bamboo or 6 bamboo, you could just call those because that would get you into Tenpai. Alright, now I'm going to go over some more complex hands. I've been keeping a lot of the hands really simple in the examples just to illustrate a certain point. But oftentimes your hand is going to be like not very clear. So take a hand like this, for example. Can you tell exactly what your hand is and what you should discard here? The idea of what you should discard is based off of a rule in the last video. So if you remember that rule, you should know what to discard as long as you can recognize that that rule applies here. Now let's break up your hand. Take out the 4-5 and put it with the 6. Now you should be able to see what the hand is. You have 3-3-4, 2-2-3, 4-5-6. So this is like that 2 pairs example. So your hand has 2 pairs. You want to make sure you keep a clear pair. So you want to discard either the 4 of characters or the 3 or 6 pin to make sure you keep a clear pair. And in this case, you would pick the 4 of characters because the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a 3-sided weight, whereas the 3, 3, 4 is just a 2-sided weight, the 3, 4. So you discard the 4 of characters. And for the reasons talked about in the last video, you wouldn't discard the 3 of characters and you wouldn't discard the 2 pin. You would be losing out quite a bit. Similarly, you wouldn't want to discard the 6 of characters because you would be losing out a lot. And just to make it clear, let's say you do discard the 6 of characters. What do you lose out on? Well, you lose out on the 1, 4, and 7 pin because those tiles no longer get you into Tenpai because you don't have a pair. The 3s could have been a pair here, but by discarding the 6, you can't use these 3s as a pair anymore. And that means you can't get to Tenpai with the 1, 4, or 7 pin. Which is why you want to make sure you keep a clear pair in this hand, and you would do that by discarding the 4 of characters. Now I do want to mention that when you break up your hand like this, you're often going to miss things, like miss ways that the tiles could have gone together even more. So you don't always want to do this, but it helps to just give you an idea of what your hand is and what you should be thinking about. So this is like a 2-pair hand, and you can see that when you break it up. Now let's say you have a really similar hand. Very similar, but just one slight difference. Instead of a 3 pin, you have a 7 pin. Now what do you discard here? Again, you could break it up like above, and you'll see it's just like a 2-pair hand. A 2-pair case. You have this 3-3-4 and a 2-2-4. But now the pin tile weight is the worst weight. It's just a single weight. So you would discard either the 4 pin or the 7 pin, and you would keep your character tiles, which make a 2-sided weight and a second pair. And here's another example of a slightly more complicated hand. So this is your hand and you draw a 5 pin. What do you discard now? Once again, you can break up your hand, and again, breaking it up is going to make you miss some things, but it'll give you the general idea of what your hand is. This is, when you break it up like this, put the 4, 5, 6 together, and you have a remaining 5, 5, 6, 6, 6, 8. This is once again an example of having 2 pairs. And the 6, 8 that goes with one pair is a single weight. The 5-6 that goes with the other pair is a two-side weight. So you want to discard the 8 of characters because, again, you want to keep 2 pairs and you want to keep your best weight, which is the 5-6 over the 6-8. So you discard the 8 of characters. But one thing, so let's say after discarding that 8 of characters, you draw the last 5 pin. And what do you do here? No, you don't call Khan. You can call Reach if you want, because you'd be in Tenpai by discarding the 6 pin. And it would also be Tanyao, so you wouldn't have to declare Reach. One thing you would miss out on, or you wouldn't see as clearly if you broke up your hand, is that a 6 would also get you to, a 6 pin would get you into Tenpai. So if you have a normal 5-5-6, drawing a 6 isn't going to complete a set, and it's not going to get you into Tenpai. But with this 4-5-5-5-6-6, drawing a 6 does complete a set, and you can discard the 4, and you'd be in Tenpai. So again, that's why you want to know, you can break up your hand, break out the completed sets to get an idea of the shape of your hand, but you also want to know how your tiles work together. So you don't just want to keep them separate. Because when you put it together, you can see the 6 also, drawing a 6 pin also completes the set. Now here's another example of a more complicated hand. What do you want to discard here? It's not that easy to see exactly what your hand is or how you should look at it. But you might think it's fine to just discard the 9 pin just to make sure your hand's going to be Tanyao. So you want your hand to be Tanyao, right? So you could just discard the 9 pin. But that wouldn't be a very good discard. And if you break up your hand, it's easier to see. Your hand is pretty much an example of a 3-pair hand. And from the last video, you know when you have 3 pairs, you don't really need all of them, and you just want to discard one of them usually. In this case, discarding the 7 bamboo gives you the most tiles to get into Tenpai. So you would probably just pick the 7 bamboo. But you wouldn't want to pick the 9 pin because you lose out so much on that discard. And just to make it clear, if you discard the 9 pin, then you're losing out on drawing the 3, 4, 6 pin. 3, 4, 6, 7 pin, I think. It's also complicated for me to see. But you're losing out on those tiles because you can't, you don't have this weight anymore. And when you keep all of these weights, or when you keep all of your pin tiles, you can complete another set with a 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So you would be losing out on most of those tiles. And you could still get Tanyao because you could still call Pon on the 2, or you could draw the 5 or 8. If you draw that, you would probably pick Pinfu instead of Tanyao though. And you could call Pon on the 7 or the 5 still. Not the 7 because you would discard it. But you can still get Tanyao anyway, so you're not really losing out by keeping the losing out on that by keeping the 9 pin. Now here's a really similar hand. The only difference is instead of 2-2 bamboo, it's 2-3 now. Now what do you discard? Again, you could break it up to get the idea of your hand, and you would see that it's like a 2-pair hand pretty much. So you want to keep 2 pairs, and you could discard. You would probably discard the 7 of bamboo to give yourself the best chances of winning or drawing a tile to get into Tenpai. But you could consider discarding the 9 pin as well, and it wouldn't be as bad in this case because or it wouldn't be that bad at all because it's like a two pair example and you're just making one of your pairs a clear pair, which is what you want to do when you have two pairs in a hand like this. Now this will be the last example of a more complicated hand. And of course it can get harder than this. You could have your chinitsu hands, which are hands of all one suit, and those can get really hard to read. But here I'm just going over like more general difficult hands that you might run into. So this was a hand I actually got while playing, and I wasn't sure of what to discard while I was playing. But um, afterwards, when I looked at it, I realized it wasn't very clear. So the only tiles you'd really choose from are the 4-pin or 7-pin, or the 8 of bamboo. Discarding the 8 of bamboo guarantees that you get E-Peiko if you draw your hand closed, and you can also call Chi on the 4 or the 6-pin or the 3 of characters to get into Tenpai. So there's that. But discarding the 4-pin or the 7-pin allows you to call Pon on the 6 or 7 bamboo or Chi on the 5 or 8 bamboo to get into Tenpai, as well as Chi on the 3 of characters, just like with the other discard. So, it would depend on how many tiles are out. If you want to call, how much points you need, how much you want to win the hand, how much you want to get into Tenpai, all of that. You want to take all of that into account to make your decision, but you would also want to know you really only want to decide between the 4-pin, 7-pin, and 8 of bamboo, and anything else would not be very good. And something else you could note is that if instead of a 7-pin it was an 8-pin, you would discard the 4 or the 8-pin. Pretty much only those, and you wouldn't discard the 8 of bamboo. The reason why the 7 is special here is because you can use the 4s as a pair, and then you have 5-7. Whereas if you use the 4s as a pair and you had 5-8, that's not a group of 2, and that doesn't make a set of 3 with any tile. So that's why that wouldn't be the right way to look at your hand. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about defense. And again, I said I think you can find some pretty good guides online, but I will talk about some here. Now, the concept I'll talk about here first will be walls, where you can see all 4 of a single tile either in your hand or discarded already, or a combination of both, or if someone called them. So if you can see all of the, say, 2 of any suit, then it makes the 1s really hard to use and also really safe against someone who declares Riichi. It's as safe as just a Suji 1 would be. So the reason for that is the only way to use a 1 when all the 2s are out of your hand is by having another 1 to make a pair or a triplet. So that's the only way you can use the 1 or need the 1. And the same thing is true when someone has 3, or you can see all of the 3s walled. The only ways to use either a 1 or a 2 are with another one of that tile. So if you have 2 2s or a single 2 waiting to pair, that's the only way you can use it. So if you could see all the 3s and all the 2s, then 2s are guaranteed to be safe against everyone, because the only way they could use it is with another one, but you can see all of them, so they can't use a 2. Now it's a little bit different with 4s, because if you can see all the 4s, well, 1 isn't necessarily safe because someone might have a 2-3 waiting on a 1 or a 4, and they either don't know all the 4s are out, or they're choosing that weight even though all the 4s are out, because that's the best weight they could get. So it doesn't necessarily make the 1 safer, but it makes the 2 and 3 more likely to be safe. It makes it like Suji because the two-sided weights that go with the 2 and the 3 aren't possible for anyone to have. So no one can have the 3 4 or the 4 5 because all the 4s are not in their hand. So that if you can see all the 4s, 2 and 3 are safer, but someone could still have like 1 3 waiting on a 2 or 1 2 waiting on a 3, so it's not as good as like when you can see all the 3s or all the 2s. And the same thing works on the other side with all of these. So the high end, like if you can see all the 6s, the 7 and the 8 are more likely to be safe, but the 9 isn't necessarily more likely to be safe. Now, if you can see all of the 5s, the 3 and the 7 are safer because the two-sided weights that go with the 3 and the 7 aren't possible. But again, this isn't quite as good as like the examples at the top because someone could have like a 2 4 waiting on a 3 or a 1 2 waiting on a 3. So it's more likely to be safe, but it's not as good. And one last thing is if someone discards a red 5 pin, you can usually, unless someone's playing like really tricky, you can assume they don't have a 5 pin in their hand. So because of that, the 2, 3, 7, and 8 are much safer than normal. But not necessarily the 1 and 4 and 6 and 9 because someone might have like 2, 3, 5 and they discard the red 5, so they lose a Han, but they might get Pinfu instead, so they gain a Han for that. So for that reason, it's not as much likely for the 1, 4, 6, 9 to be safe, but the 2, 3, 7, 8 are much safer. Now, here's another concept of outer tiles, where if someone discards a tile early that's close to the middle, then the tiles closer to the edge of that tile are more likely to be safe. And the basic idea behind that is that usually you wouldn't discard a tile from a pair early because you usually don't have that many pairs early. So if someone discards a tile early that's near the middle, you would usually assume they don't have the tiles around there, or they have the tile, like if it's a 4, they might have 6, 7. So the 4 isn't very good for them to use. So they might have the tiles on the other end, like the 6, 7 end, but it wouldn't be likely they have like a 1, 2, or 3 in their hand, or another 4. And another way to think of this is you could think of a hand range. So if you see these tiles, you can think like the range outside of the 2 and 7 of characters is more likely to be safe. It's not as good as Suji, and certainly not as good as Genbutsu, but it's better than nothing. So it's more likely the 1, 8, and 9 of characters are safe. It's more likely the 9 pin is safe, and you don't really know much about the bamboo tiles other than the Genbutsu. Next, you also want to think about the value of the hand you're playing into, and also how much it might be worth if someone wins off the tile you're discarding. So if you discard a Suji, you're guaranteeing the person can't have Pinfu. They can't have that Yaku, because that's not possible when it's Suji. And also, if you discard an honor or a terminal, you're guaranteeing the person doesn't have Tanyao, and they don't have Tanyao, because if you have an honor tile or a terminal in your hand, you don't get Tanyao. So discarding those tiles is also better because it limits the value that your opponent might have somewhat. Now on the other end, if you play in on a Dora tile, then obviously the hand that you're playing into is going to have that Dora tile, and it's going to be worth a lot more because of that. And if you discard a tile that's near the Dora tile, it's more likely that if you play in the person's going to have the dora, so their hand might be more valuable. And you also want to think about special yaku like honitsu or chinitsu, and also chanto or junchan. If you might if you feel like someone might be going for those hands based on their discards, and then they declare reach, you might not want to follow the general rules. So if someone discards like a bunch of um, middle character and pin tiles really early, and then honor tiles later, and then bamboo tiles at the end, just because they discard a 4 bamboo, which makes 1 bamboo usually a lot safer, you might not want to discard the 1 bamboo because you might think it might play into a honitsu or chinitsu hand, and that would be a lot of points. So for that reason, you might want to pick other tiles to discard, even if they might be slightly more dangerous in general. And the same is true for like if someone's discarding all their middle tiles and then honor tiles and terminals later, and then they declare reach, you might not want to discard honor tiles and edge tiles, because even though they're usually safer, there's a risk of like chanto or junchan, and that would be much more expensive than normal. So you might not want to discard the 1 of characters, even though in general it would be safe when, or more likely to be safe when someone discards a 4 of characters. The last thing I'm going to talk about is situational play and declaring reach. And I'll first talk about when to consider not declaring reach. So if you have a closed han or a closed hand that's 4 han or 6 han exactly, in general, you probably wouldn't want to declare reach. Sometimes you could, sometimes there are reasons to, but most of the times you wouldn't necessarily want to. So let's look at the points you get. If you don't declare reach, you get 7,700 or 8,000 if you tsuma. Whereas if you do declare reach, you get 8,000 on Ron or 12,000 if you tsuma. Possibly 12,000 on Ron with Uradora, or 16,000 on Tsuma with 2 Uradora. That one's not likely. But, and so like, I also didn't mention, this hand is Ipeiko Pinfu Tanyao with 1 Dora. So it'd be 7,700 is a lot of points, and also your weight isn't very tricky. It's very good. It's a 258 of bamboo weight, but it's not like a tricky weight. So for that reason, you would probably not declare reach, just because it gives you a better chance of getting 7,700 points, and that's a lot of points. And really, the only big benefit of declaring reach is that if you draw it yourself, it's 12,000 instead of 8,000. But 8,000 is still a lot. And also, if you have a hand that is like very improvable. So, a hand like this, you're now in Tenpai. You could discard either the 7 or the 9 of characters. But one thing you should look at is you have 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 7. So if you drew a 5 or 6 of characters, you get Tanyao and possibly Sanshoku, possibly Pinfu, depending on which one it is. So your hand would go from like just reach if you declare reach, or just Tsuma if you Tsuma, to a hand that's like Tanyao, Sanshoku, possibly Pinfu as well. And that's such a big difference in value, and your hand isn't like, your weight isn't good as is, that you might just not declare reach for that reason, because you can improve your hand. You also wouldn't want to declare reach when you have a closed hand that you can win without reach, and winning is more important than points. Or if it's like at the end and you don't actually think you're going to win at all, like you really don't think you're going to win, but you're in Tenpai, you don't want to declare reach because you're just throwing in 1,000 points. And if you don't think you're going to win, you're just like throwing away those points, and anyone else can take them if they win the next hand. So it's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about, but declaring reach is throwing in 1,000 points. And if you don't win the hand, you don't get those points back unless you win the next hand. Also, that's some ideas on when to not declare reach, but if you have tricky weights, you might want to declare reach. Like if it's Suji or if it's terminals and honor tiles, you might want to declare reach because those tiles are more likely to be discarded. It also depends on the level of the room you're playing in. So if you're playing in a really strong room, people won't discard unsafe honor tiles as often, and they won't discard unsafe terminals as often when you declare reach. So even if you have a tricky weight, it's less likely someone will play into that. But in lower level rooms, a lot of times you'll just see people discard honor tiles or just discard terminals, even when they're not safe. So you would consider reaching when you have weights on those like tricky tiles. And even in like high level rooms, if you have no other safe tiles in general, you're gonna discard like non-Yakuai honor tiles or honor tiles if you don't have those, or terminals if you don't have those. So even a good player is going to discard like that if they don't have save tiles. So for that reason, you might still declare reach, especially if your hand can't win without reach. And then here's some hands where I'd say it's more up to you. Some players might play it one way, some players might always play it another way. But I'd say it's really up to you. So if your hand is like 2 or 3 Han and it's Pinfu, then you get a lot of points by declaring reach. So it goes up from, this is a 3 Han Pinfu hand, and it goes up from 3,900 to 7,700. And also if you sumo it, it goes up from 5,200 to 8,000. And with Urador, maybe 12,000. So that's a pretty good point increase, but you're also less likely to get your hand because people are less likely to play in when they know you're in Tenpai. So it really is up to you. Like, do you want the points or do you want to win your hand more likely? And then, especially, I'd say with only 2 Han, you probably do want to declare reach most of the time, depending on the situation, because of the potential point increase. So without reach, it's only 2,000, but with reach, it's about 4,000, and it can go up to almost 8,000 on Ron. And even on Sumo, the point value pretty much doubles and can go up to 8,000 with Urador, just one. So you might want to declare reach. You don't have to, and it would depend on the situation, but it's definitely something you would want to consider. So just because you can win your hand closed doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't declare reach. It's going to depend on the situation. So now let's talk about some situations. So let's say it's South 4, you're South player, and you're in third, and the dealer is first. So it's not likely to go into West Wind, although it could. What should your goal be here? Well, first, you don't want to get last, but there's not too much danger of that. If second is worth points to you, then you might just want to try to win a really quick hand so you can get second. If you really want to get first, then you want to try to get like a 3,900 point hand and win off the dealer, or you want to sumo on a big hand like a Mangan, and that would get you first. So that's the idea you would want to have in your mind. If you just want to get second, you want to win with a really fast hand. If you want to get first, you want to sumo on a Mangan or win off the dealer and take it into West Wind. Now let's say it's South 4 and you're a West player and you have 40,000. So you're like way in the lead. What do you want to think about here? You just want to make sure you don't play into the dealer's hand. You can try to win fast, and you don't have to worry too much about playing into anyone else's hand. But while trying to play fast, you don't want to play into to the dealer's hand because the match will go on and you'll lose points, and you might not get first if you do that. So that would just be the big point. You could play into a hand from south player, probably, unless it's a Hanuman. You could play into a hand from north and probably still get first, unless it's a Mongon. But if you play into the dealer's hand, the match is going to go on and you might not win anymore. Because they're so far down, they probably won't win on that hand, though. So even that wouldn't be the worst thing. Now, let's say it's South 3. You're the dealer, and you're way behind. What should be in your mind here? Well, this is your last dealer turn, and you're way behind. So pretty much you have to go with any hand you get. You have to try to win almost no matter what. So if someone declares reach, you pretty much can't fold. You just have to play for your hand in the best way you can. And you can't really think about playing defensive because you really can't expect to catch up in South 4 since you're so far behind. So you really have to do whatever you can to defend your dealer turn. Now, let's say it's a very similar thing. It's South 3, you're way behind, but you're Southwind this time. Now what do you think about? Well, you do get another dealer turn, so you can, this specific hand, you don't have to win it. If someone declares reach, you might want to defend if your hand isn't that big or isn't worth that much. So, especially if it was West player, if it's West player, then you don't want to really go after your hand because even if you stop them from winning, you're stopping the person who is way ahead from winning. So that's not that big of a deal. Whereas someone else could have played in, and then you have a better chance of getting out of last, and you're going to be the dealer, so you'll still have chances even if you don't win this hand. Now, if it was like East who declares reach, this would be something you have to make your own decision. Like, you might want to play your hand and try to win just so East doesn't win and get farther ahead. And then that would make it much harder to get out of fourth. But if you go for your hand and play into East's hand, there's a good chance you're just going to lose and go negative and lose. So you would have to make your own decision based on your hand and the situation on the table, like the tiles discarded. Now let's say, once again, it's a very similar situation. You're way in last and it's South 3 and you're West. Well, now you're not going to get another dealer turn. So you pretty much have to go after any hand you get. You have to try to win the hand, but you can't win it quickly or cheaply. You have to win as big as possible. So usually that means you're not going to call any tiles. You're going to declare reach. If your hand isn't very valuable, you're going to hope for Ipatsu Tsumo Uradora or something like that. And that's all you can do. But you can't really fold because you don't have enough hands to catch up. So, if someone were to declare reach and you fold the hand, well, now you're losing points unless you get in Tenpai. And if the dealer's not in Tenpai or doesn't win, then you have to make it all up in the very last hand, which isn't going to happen very often. Now let's say it's East 1, and there have been a lot of Riichis and a lot of people being in Tenpai. The dealer's been in Tenpai, but no one's won. So it's the second bonus, and there's 3 Reach 6 in the middle. What do you want to think about? Well, you want to think about all that bonus in the middle, and you want to do whatever you can to just win the hand and get all of that bonus, because it's 3,600 points extra. So if you just win a 1,000 point hand, you're getting 3,600 extra points. So because of all that bonus, you just want to win as fast as you can, pretty much. Now, if your hand is also a really good hand, like really high value, then you might want to go for the high value as well, but you're going to want to think about just winning quickly to get the bonus in the middle. Now, next, let's say it's South 2. You're the dealer and you're way ahead. Let's say you have a hand that's like 2 Han, maybe not Pinfu, so it's worth like 3,900 or something around there. Or not 3,900, like 5,800, I guess. Let's say you have a hand in that range, and something like 3,000 to 6,000. But again, it's not a hand you can win closed except on sumo. Do you declare Riichi? Well, you wouldn't have to, of course, but I think there's a lot of reasons to declare Riichi because, like, no one else can really afford to play into your hand, and they all know that, or they should, if they're like trying to not get last. They should know they can't afford to play into your hand because then they're probably going to get last. So, um, if your hand is in that middle range, you're getting a lot more value, and other people will probably fold. So, because winning the hand is going to give you a lot of value, and it's going to make like South, who's going to get another dealer turn, it's going to make it harder for them to catch up. So you might declare Riichi. But if it's a really cheap hand, like declaring Riichi only, it's just like Riichi Pinfu, and it's only 3,000, then 3,000 ish, then you don't necessarily, like, you might not declare Riichi because winning a really cheap hand isn't going to mean that much, but winning an expensive hand is still going to mean something. So, of course, there's reasons to not declare Riichi so you don't play into a big hand from like South. But I would say there are pretty good reasons to declare Riichi in a lot of situations. Just to win a bigger hand to make sure you keep your lead. And even if you happen to play into a big hand from South, you're still probably gonna be in first. So I'd say it would depend on your hand. And while you might think you just shouldn't declare Riichi, I think there are some times where you might. Now let's say it's South 4, you're North, and you're at 29,000. Well, when you start, you should know this and know that all you have to do is win a 1,000 point hand to get first. So you want to win as fast as you possibly can. And of course, if someone else, you still want to watch out for like playing into the dealer's hand because it might be big and you get last. But you want to know you just need 1,000 points to get first. And if South and West win, if either of those players win, they might not end the match. Now let's say you're playing a match that went into West win. It's the 8th turn. You have 24,700 points, and this is your hand. Do you declare Riichi? Well, your hand is Pinfu. You can win it closed. It's a pretty good hand. You have 2 Dora, and it's West win, so every point is going to matter a lot. Like, throwing in 1,000 points here is going to drop you to 3rd immediately. So you're going to go from 2nd to 3rd. So there's like a lot of reasons why you don't want to declare Riichi. But this is a hand that actually happened while I was playing. And I declared Riichi. Now, the reason why I declared Riichi is because I knew how much my hand was worth. On Ron or Sumo, I wouldn't get to 30,000. On Sumo, it's only 5,200, so I'd have 29,900 exactly if I Sumo and I didn't declare Riichi. And on Ron, it's only 3,900 exactly, so that wouldn't get me to 30,000 either. And if I just win the hand, I get to first, but I don't end the match, and I give anyone else the chance to win the hand and end the match themselves, and then I wouldn't get first. So for that reason, I declared Riichi. Also, I thought if West won, they might not end the match either, and I'd still have a chance to not get last, and I wouldn't be too far from third place. And if I got people to fold, then I get points at the end, and that'll get me to second. And it's also possible people might not fold, so if they aren't going to fold, then I want to make sure I end the match if I win. And the dealer was in Tenpai on a very cheap hand that didn't have any Yaku, and it also didn't look like they were folding. The person across was pretty close. The person on the left wasn't very close. And what actually happened is I drew my tile, and because I declared Riichi, I got over 30,000 and I got first. So here I think it was good that I knew how much my hand was worth exactly, and I declared Riichi. And finally, let's say it's like South 4. It's the fourth bonus somehow. There's 3 Riichi sticks in the middle. And you have 23,500 points. So you're in second, but by a really small margin. The only thing I'd mention here is, well, you want to win fast because you're probably going to end, like the next person to win is probably going to end the match. And you don't want to declare Riichi because it's going to drop you to last just by declaring Riichi, and the next person to win is probably going to end the match, like I said. So you probably just don't want to declare Riichi unless for some reason you have to and you think you have a hand that's going to win. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is Tenho and last place avoidance. So you've probably heard, if you like play on Tenho and look stuff up about it, you've probably heard about how it's a lot about not getting last. So let's say if you're fourth dan, you lose 90 points if you get last. And if you're playing in the Jokyu room, if you get first and second, that's only plus 75. So if you just get one last, it's losing more points than a first and a second combined. And if you're getting first, second, third, and fourth evenly, you're losing points on the average. And even if you're alternating between like first and fourth, you have to get first so much more to be making points. So you really don't want to be getting last. And if you're sixth dan, you lose 120 points when you get last. So that's so much that it is a big deal when you're getting last. So you really don't want to get last. But if you're 3Q, you don't lose points when you get last. So there's no reason to think of last, like if you're trying to rank up specifically, there's no reason to think of last as like any different than third or second, especially if you're playing in the general room. So it's just about getting first. It's not about not getting last. And even if you're 1Q, then when you get last, you only lose 30 points and you can't rank down. So getting last isn't such a big deal. And if you're playing in the Ippon room, if you're alternating first and last, you're still going up in points, and you're going to rank up pretty quickly. So it's not necessary, like getting last isn't such a big deal as it is you just want to be able to get first sometimes. And now, even if you're second dan, you lose 60 points when you get last, which is a lot, but if you're playing in the Joe Q room, you get 60 points when you get first. So if you're getting first, second, third, and fourth evenly, you're going up in points. So you want to know, like, if you're really trying to rank up, yes, you don't want to get last, but you want to know, like, how the points work. Because you don't want to be 3Q and then, like, be second, but second in a Hanshan, but in danger of getting last. And you don't want to, like, not try to avoid last because you don't lose points when you get last. You want to go for first. And even 1Q, you don't rank down, so again, you want to know how the points work and not just take the advice of you don't want to get last ever. And again, it's like it depends on what your goals are and things like that. Because when you get last, you also lose rating. So if you care about your rating, then you don't want to get last for that reason.